my honor to introduce this year's Inspire speakers to you. Last year, 10 young strategists stood on stage in New York City with shaking hands scared out of their minds, scared not only to be in the presence of their planning superheroes, but also to present to them. I know this because I was one of them. And before we knew it, it was over, and all we had left was this feeling that we were a part of something very special. For that reason, the Inspire program will always hold a really important place in my heart. So often, as young strategists, we struggle to be heard. We watch our mentors speak and inspire us at conference after conference, and we wait for our turn to share a part of ourselves. Alex, Jen, Neil, and Hector, this is your turn. This year, we asked strategists with under 4 years of planning experience to present a video with their ideas on how to bring value and respect back to our planning discipline. It's my pleasure to introduce this year's first speaker. This is Alex Brands, an associate brand strategist at Peter Mayer Advertising in New Orleans, who will give his presentation on less.
Woo!
Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Brands. As Brooke said, I'm an associate strategist at Peter Mayer Advertising in New Orleans. And this morning, my presentation is called Unless. But before we get into it, I'd like to give you all my Twitter handle at ALXBRANDS. So if you have any questions or comments over the course of the presentation, please feel free to shoot me a note. I'd love to chat. So I'd like to open the presentation with a quote from Einstein that says, if I only had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. And I thought that this was a really interesting and powerful quote, and it provided a very great model to look at the issue that we're trying to tackle this morning, which is how to revitalize the value of strategy in advertising. And so what we really want to talk about is value. And if you look at value and where value comes from, it seems as though value comes from 3 distinct places: perception, utility, and rarity. And so we'll go through these three, and I'd like to start with the shallowest version, which is perception. So perception-based value is value that comes from simply the perception that things are, one thing is better than the other, but that it isn't rooted in anything much deeper than that. So when we look at these 3 things, and we look at perception specifically, you'll see that we're surrounded by things that we perceive to be better than others. Handbags are a perfect example. You have 2 handbags that are sitting on the shelf, and they have very, very similar raw materials and labor costs, but as a result, we slap a label on one and we're willing to pay double. That's perception-based value. And if you look at history, there's a great example if you look at Prussia in the 1800s. So in 1813, Prussia was at war with France, and they asked the nobility to hand in their jewelry because they needed the gold and silver for its raw material value. And so rather than giving up jewelry altogether, the noblemen decided they were going to recreate all their jewelry in cast iron, a nearly worthless metal. What's interesting is that for the next 50 years following the war, jewelry made of cast iron was the most valuable jewelry in Prussia. So that's perception-based value, and that's really interesting in terms of what we're trying to tackle today. So the next type of value is utility. And utility-based value comes from the idea that what we have around us serves a purpose or a function, and that's where the value comes from. And I would say the majority of things we surround ourselves with on a daily basis fall into this category. So a very simple example, one of my favorite examples is paper towel. I buy paper towels on a very regular basis because they solve a problem for me. I have dirty dishes or I need to clean something, I spill something, and I buy paper towels because they solve that problem. They're a tool for me. And so they serve that utility. What's interesting is that once something breaches the utility layer of value, perception is already baked in. So I buy paper towels because they serve a purpose, and because they serve a purpose, they have value, and because they have actual value, they also have a perception of value. So if we go to the 3rd layer, we're talking about the deepest form of value, and that's rarity. And so the typical go-to here is to talk about diamonds, but because they don't really serve a purpose, I would rather talk about an emerging technology like 3D printers. So this is a MakerBot Replicator 2, and right now this bad boy will run you about $2 grand. And so the reason that it's so expensive, and the reason that we're willing to pay $2 grand for something like this, and the reason that they're willing to charge it, is because it's emerging technology. It's something that we couldn't easily replicate. It would take me years to try and recreate this in my garage. And it's something that allows us to push into new boundaries and to push forward into something that we couldn't do before. So the last theoretical portion of the presentation is that value cascades over time. And so if you look at emerging technologies when they first emerged and where they are now, a perfect example is the calculator. So the 4-function calculator came out in 1961 and it cost $1,000. And so now we wouldn't dream of paying any more than $6 for a 4-function calculator. But what you'll see is that as the technology became more common, it fell into the utility area, and then eventually the market matured, and now it's living in an area that's purely perception. So now that we're done the theory behind value, we can start talking about planning. How does this have to do with planning, and how do we revitalize the value of planning? And so what we're really talking about is a 3-pronged issue. And the issue has to do with clients, creatives, and account people, each separately. And the first issue is that clients don't want to pay for it. And if you look at that through the lens that we've just laid out, the issue is that they don't perceive value in strategy. To them, a handbag is a handbag, work is work, and the extra time and resources that go into doing strategy is essentially a luxury. And to get around that, and this is where the theme of the presentation comes in, it's unless. Unless clients don't want to pay for it, unless it creates a tangible return, and unless we can treat it the same way they're treating it, as an investment for the future, as an investment in work, and as an investment in creating better work. So the second issue is that creatives don't always value it. And again, if we look at it through the lens that we've laid out, that's a utility issue. For a creative, strategy should provide them a tool. It should bring them to a place that they could not have gotten had we not provided that strategy and that insight. And so without our tools and what we are providing on a daily basis, they wouldn't be able to do their jobs as well as they're able to do their jobs today. And so if we can elevate the creative plane, then we're bringing true value, and we're creating what the creatives need to thrive and going forward. And so the last issue is that account people try to substitute for it. And very simply, this is a rarity issue. If you're providing insights that are truly irreplaceable, and you've gone to a place that's a little off the beaten path, and you're providing them with something that they couldn't have whipped up very quickly, then that's how you're providing value. You're overcoming the issue that pops up as a result of rarity. So when you add these 3 things up, a tangible return on investment, creative elevation, and irreplaceability, what you really get is depth. And I know depth means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I'm specifically talking about not being afraid to fall down the rabbit hole and end up in a place that you may not have expected to be to find an insight that will bring you closer to your goal. So it's about seeing things that are parallel, but not necessarily obvious. That ecosystems can be incredible predictors of market trends. That car thieves know a thing or two about automotive interior design. That prostitutes have the purest of brand perception when it comes to luxury cars because their livelihoods depend on it. It's the truth. You have to think about these things. And so if nothing else, I'd like you to take away 3 things from today's presentation. Value is a layered idea, and it consists of 3 layers: perception, utility, and rarity. That over time, value will cascade from rarity, the deepest form of value, to perception, the shallowest form of value, and finally, that the strategy that breaches the rarity frontier will bring the most long-term value for you and your organization. So I'd like to thank you and the 4A's for your time this morning. And again, if you have any questions or you just want to chat, please feel free to find me later or shoot me a note on Twitter. Thank you.